I'm Rachel Papazzoni. Welcome to Close of Business. Coming up on the program, mortgage deferral time bomb. The clock's ticking on stressed investors as banks start to crack down. And shovel ready. The government last year promised a $100 billion infrastructure funnel to boost the economy. How much more do we need now? Also on the program, Qantas grounded, the pandemic loophole that could see more workers lose their jobs. For 6 months, home loan customers have been able to pause repayments on their mortgage. It's been a welcome offer for people whose income has been crushed by the COVID crisis. 1 in 10 home loans has been paused, but Australians now need to resume those payments. Daniel Ziffer explains.
So there's a problem, a big one. The economy is sitting on a time bomb. It was created with the best of intentions and it avoided a much bigger catastrophe. But we have to defuse it and we're up against the clock.
1 in 10 mortgages in Australia aren't being paid. They're on pause. It's a payment holiday, mortgage pausing, whatever you'd like to call it. 1 in 10. In every city, every suburb, every street. By mid-March, coronavirus had the economy in free fall, with the New Start payment below the poverty line and the government knocking back calls for a wage subsidy. The banks stepped in.
There is assistance that banks can provide already, and anyone who is concerned should not hesitate to be ringing their bank.
That was the start of mortgage pausing, a 6-month breather for anyone who wanted it. Hundreds of thousands of people took up the offer.
I'm Simon Enger. I live on the Gold Coast in Queensland and my mortgage has been on pause since the start of the COVID crisis.
Of the $2.7 trillion loaned in Australia, most of it is for housing. More than 10% of those loans have been on pause for 6 months.
My wife got stood down from work and given the uncertain environment that was ahead at that point in time and no governmental support, I thought it was a great strategy to put my mortgage on pause.
Lots has happened since the start of the pandemic. We've largely crushed the spread of the virus. New Start is dead, reborn as Job Seeker. And there's a massive wage subsidy program called JobKeeper, now being trimmed back. And people like Simon Enger have to start paying their mortgages again.
I'm Karen Cox. I'm the CEO of the Financial Rights Legal Centre.
Karen Cox helps run the National Debt Helpline, where people can call and speak to a free independent financial counsellor when they're having trouble with money and loans.
One thing is absolutely clear, whereas deferrals were given with very, very little contact or information in March, it will not be the same this time around.
In March, pretty much anyone who asked could get a deferral. For some customers, it was as simple as an email. Extensions are available for up to 4 months, but it won't be easy to get one. Banks have signalled that they're going to work to keep people in their homes by switching customers to lower payments or interest-only options. But investors who can no longer pause their mortgages might be pushed to sell in a falling market.
We'll certainly do what we can to keep customers inside their home. An investment property is a different proposition to a home that people live within. It's really going to depend on individual customer circumstances.
1 in 5 customers on pause aren't answering the phone when their bank is calling. Experts are concerned that some customers don't want to face up to their problems.
Research shows that the sooner people come to terms with the fact that they're in trouble, speak to their credit provider and get some sort of arrangement in place, then the greater the chances are that they're going to come out the other end of this.
If you have a mortgage that is paused, you will have already been contacted by your bank asking whether you can resume making payments.
Look, have the conversation with the lender because they want to work with you as much as possible. They don't want to be left with having to offload a whole heap of properties or, make decisions in relation to people's lives.
If you're on pause, now's the time to act.
The pandemic effect is filtering through to home prices, and it's clear the COVID-19 restrictions are having an impact. Nationally, home prices fell 0.1% in September, while Sydney and Melbourne saw prices slide 0.9 and 0.3% respectively. Smaller capital cities, where there are less restrictions, posted gains last month. Forced sales have not become an issue yet, but that might not be the case forever.
Absolutely, it is a risk. And it really depends on how many or what proportion of properties are being added to the marketplace that are under some sort of urgency or distress.
The federal government has spent tens of billions of dollars on economic life support since the COVID crisis began, with measures like JobKeeper and JobSeeker. Those assistance packages are now winding back, with the promise infrastructure projects will help jobs recovery and economic growth. But even the Reserve Bank's concerned not enough is being spent. Keen eyes will be looking for a big injection of infrastructure spending in Tuesday's budget, far beyond the $100 billion program already promised last year. Deep beneath Sydney's streets and famed harbour, work on the New South Wales Government's multi-billion-dollar metro rail project is heading towards its final destination. This will become the Martin Place station in Australia's biggest infrastructure project. This is the kind of work the federal government is under pressure to reveal in next week's budget. Last year, the Morrison government announced a $100 billion infrastructure fund over the next decade, when it had its eye on bringing the budget back to black. Those surplus aspirations have now evaporated, and the focus now is on job creation and pulling us out of recession via what many predict will be a massive upgrade in infrastructure spending. It's already started drip-feeding the new spending list, last week announcing an upgrade to the NBN.
We are now at a point where we can upgrade because of the methodical work we've done to roll out the network.
It would be incredibly welcome, it would be incredibly meaningful, it will lift productivity, it'll create jobs, but we need to make sure that it is at commercial rates for people to take up.
As with every promise, the devil will be in the detail. Between March and August this year, the federal and state governments announced about $3 billion worth of infrastructure projects to combat the COVID economic crisis. The federal government's contribution for those shovel-ready projects came from the $100 billion infrastructure fund it announced in last year's budget. Documents obtained by the business under Freedom of Information show RBA liaisons or industry contacts it speaks to are sceptical the projects are as new as the government portrays them. The bank also says the spending announced so far adds a relatively small amount to the pipeline of public infrastructure work yet to be done. Timing is everything when you want to kickstart the economic engine. Economists warn any further infrastructure announcements will need to help straight away.
We don't want projects that are going to take years and years and years to plan, that the jobs need to be created immediately. That's because the government's support measures for workers are ending. It's already started winding back JobKeeper and split it into full-time and part-time payments. The full-time rate was cut this week and halved for part-time. Another cut is scheduled for the start of next year before it disappears altogether in March. With the tapering of JobKeeper, that's what's needed. We need to replace that activity now in the next 6 months.
Modelling by Deloitte shows just removing the coronavirus supplement by Christmas could lead to another 145,000 people out of work and a $31 billion hit to the economy.
We're going to need some very significant spending if we're going to see all of that impact offset. I don't think that's what we're going to see.
Nikki Hutley wants the federal government to help the states build more social housing.
Deals with that, keeping people, and particularly tradies, in jobs where they use their skills, but it also has a long-term social benefit as well as that short-term economic hit.
Economists say many small-scale projects have an immediate impact.
Things like painting the town hall, fixing gutters, fixing footpaths, they don't sound much, but over all of the council areas of Australia, if there's an amount of money allocated there, then people in that area will be employed fixing those things.
The clock is ticking on the government. Ahead of Tuesday's budget, AMP Capital senior economist Diana Messina joined me to discuss what the economy needs and what the government's likely to deliver. Diana, this year's budget will be very different from the back in black mantra that we heard last year. How big should the government's spending and therefore the deficit of this year's budget be?
Well, we think that the budget will reach about $230 billion deficit in this current financial year. That would be quite different from the very small surplus, as you said, that they were expecting. It's worth about 12% of GDP. That would be the largest budget deficit that Australia has ever had since the Second World War, where it reached a much higher level, I think close to 16% or so of GDP. But obviously it's the right time to do this. If we didn't have such a large budget deficit, if we didn't have this very large government spending program, then the economy would fall from a recession into a depression, which is much harder to eventually get out of.
What's the number one thing you'd like to see the government announce on Tuesday?
I think tax cuts are still quite important for the household, and they are likely to be announced. It seems, based on the leaks, that the government is only going to bring forward stage 2 of the tax cuts, which were meant to start in 2022. They're likely to be brought forward to 2021. Those tax cuts will mainly be for middle income earners, but the actual tax cut that's going to be achieved still looks quite small. I think that there is still a case to be made to bring forward the 3rd stage of tax cuts as well, which were meant to start in 2024, to give some income back to households. I also think that there's some room for the government to potentially increase the job seeker payment, which is the unemployment benefit that's being paid. I think job seeker is probably a more equal benefit that's paid if you're looking for work rather than job keeper, because I'm worried that job keeper might end up keeping staff or employees in jobs where they're tied to that job, they don't want to leave it, but in the long run that's not good for productivity growth. I think an unemployment benefit payment might probably be a better way to go, but I don't think that they're going to announce anything on job seeker just yet.
Another leak is the suggestion that businesses would be able to claim back some of the tax that they'd paid pre-COVID pandemic. Do you think that would be a good measure to help businesses?
I think generally business tax cuts or these types of incentives to help businesses generally show that over the longer run they do tend to help business investment, and some of these tax loss offsets that the government is talking about have actually been used in offshore other OECD countries, and apparently they do work quite well to stimulate investment growth. But even if you think about our situation before COVID, business investment in Australia was already running at a pretty soft level. The mining sector was recovering, but non-mining investment was still strong. So changing the story around business investment takes time to get jobs in place. It's good for productivity growth in the long run, but I think in the short term, the government should still be focusing on helping household incomes, because that's what will really get us through the next 12 to 18 months, where you're still seeing a very high unemployment rate. You need to support household incomes.
AMP Capital has been speaking for a few months about a potential move by the RBA to cut that interest rate even lower. Is that still the position?
We think that the Reserve Bank needs to do more, and in terms of supporting the economy. They've cut interest rates to 0.25% in March. They've got a 3-year bond target, so they're purchasing bonds, a type of quantitative easing program. But clearly the economy needs more support. The shutdown in Victoria is going to be a big drag on the economy in the September quarter. So hopefully we'll be out of the recession by the September quarter, but growth will still look pretty low, and growth is still going to take probably a year to get back to its pre-COVID levels. In that environment, the government should be doing more, which they are, and that's why we also think that the Reserve Bank should be cutting the cash rate to 0.1%, which we think they will do, and why we think that the bond yield target should also be cut, and why they should continue to purchase more bonds as well, because it generally brings down the cost of borrowing for the economy. It increases lending and spending in the economy as well.
Diana Messina, as always, good to talk to you.
Thank you.
Unions have slammed Qantas's